Brabam. I'm an astrologer, and the title of this lecture or tape is The Misconceptions of Astrology / Introduction to Astrology as well. Now, I'd like to start off first, giving you a little information and a biography about me. I've been studying approximately about 35 years of astrology. I was first taught from my father, that was an excellent astrologer, and it became actually one of my passions and now a vocation as well. And I'd like to also thank him, my mother, my father, the rest of my family for also, well, actually, every is a product of every family, a product of a child, and so forth, in the community. And then I would like to also start to go into, today is a special day as well for two reasons. Importantly, first one is because this is Malcolm X's birthday, which I truly admire the man and his works as far. And I like to give blessings of these and honoring for him. Secondly, I like to also, because of today is a new moon, which is insightful in the sign of Taurus, which we'll do a little bit of elaboration on that, which is a good for auspicious for beginnings and good beginnings and to grow with that. And now I'd like to start into, more or less, into a couple of things into astrology, which would start is, what is astrology? That would be the first question I think I'd like to start off on. Well, astrology is based off, we go from the dictionary world, it's broken down for two words, astro, star, and ology, which is the study of or science of. So basically, in 25 words or less, is the science of studying stars. Now, how each astrologer may personalize that, and of course that will come into a personal enlightenment that everybody has when they come to studying metaphysics or esotericism. They come to their own realization of what their inner self is, and it manifests to the outer world. So make that a little even basically clear in plain English. What I'm going to go into is the fact that the stars are two things we have. We use astrology as timing is one of them, and cycles is relationship. Relationships, are as far as astrology. We're going to do it this way. First thing, timing is very interesting because one of the basic things, we all use astrology every day. We don't normally see that as astrology because it's so natural, and it's supposed to be natural. Let's start off with this thing. I'll give you a perfect example of what astrology works. If you ever get to meet, well, you meet people on a very daily basis or weekly or whatever the case. When the first time you meet any person, the first thing after they will do introduction, you give you their name. If that person ever changes their name during life, guess what? Your mind will always set it on that first impression of their name. Astrology is the same way. Everything has a beginning. And from that, we start with that beginning, and it stays indented into our mind in that space of time. So if somebody's introduced their name as William, like for example, and then they said that some people call him by another name, which would be, say, Bob or Bill, that person will always be known to that person as William. And the person who ever introduced it to it as their self-Bill, it would be Bill. That is one conceptualized astrology. That's how it works to us on a daily basis and how it works in your life, but it's not so much of a mystery. The second thing is cycles. That's important because the obvious cycle that we all aware about is our birthday, which is a cycle what we call a solar return, which is the cycle of the sun coming back from that date of birth, leaving and coming back again. That is one cycle. We have a monthly cycle, which is the moon, which we currently know as a cycle when the first of the month is usually bills or rent day, depending on that. That's another cycle. We have also a 2-year cycle, which is the planet Mars. Now, let me explain this here. When we use astrology, when we say planets, we have two misnomers that people probably think of. It's the sun, which is not a planet, but it is a star, and the moon, which is not a planet either. It's a satellite to Earth. But we consider them in this for nomenclature. We call them, make it simplify and call them planets. Now, the most commonly astrology that everybody is aware of is we call sun sign astrology, which is particularly from Western society at this point. We use sun sign because the first question everybody's asking is, what's your sign? Well, that's one part of you, actually 1/10 of you. Actually, because of you have a characteristics in astrology when you do is a natal chart, which is, again, another term. Natal means birth, Latin for birth. So chart is your birth chart. So if anybody's not familiar with that, ask any woman that's a mother to know about postnatal care. Right. Again, post meaning after and natal meaning birth. So moving on with that, I want to encourage people to have an open mind as far as we go in there, because I know we probably have questions or beliefs and ideologies. So my position here is not to advocate to change anything, but just information. We can just have a little good time with it. Hopefully I don't bore too many people. If not, you have a good sleeping tape to go with. So introduction. So, excuse me. So what we're going to do, getting back to astrology and psycho, I wanted to go into astrology. When astrology is used, that's actually a generic name. Astrology has branches out of it. For example, I'm going to give you a list of astrology. When the first one we know is natal astrology. We call it sun sign, which is part of natal, which is the birth. It deals with that, and they have other offshoots from that. There's another part of astrology called medical astrology that deals with persons or individuals with the parts of the body and medical related to them astrologically. In other words, one of the phenomena that is caused, it's been scientifically documented that the moon has a great influence over the waters and fluids in the world. We're partly the same composition, almost 70% or something, same composition as the Earth. The moon has an actual influence over us during that pull of the full moon to low tide, new moon. So that encompasses as well too, because it has certain documentation that people tend to frequency during the full moon cycle of knowing to be a little bit more, let's say, above normal, a little bit sporadic or erratic. Ergo, the term lunatic comes from, means relation to the moon and being the influences over to the moon. Now, there also is a currency that during that particular time, the crime rate exceeds or goes up. Also, at the same correlations, there is a influx of birth, so to speak. Also, there's more of a time when people are liable to just be a little bit out of bounds, so to speak, or feel a little crazy. Well, this is one of the effects of the full moon, or the moon itself affecting on us as the planet Earth, or we inhabitants of the planet Earth. This is another, again, the everyday thing that's going on with astrology, but it's not mystified. Again, we have misconceptions and so forth, and that's one of the aspects with it. The next part we deal with is called Mundane astrology, which deals with political countries, so forth. See, in other words, everything in astrology has a birth chart, from down to your pet to the beginning of a state, because they have a date of origin or establishment, even to a country when the inauguration. Like, for example, the United States has Cancer July 4th, which is in the transit of the sun going in Cancer, the sign. So each country and nation, or whatever way in particular, we have a birth chart or a chart related to that. So mundane deals with not the individual, but the country itself. All right, so what we deal with that is this is one of the oldest forms of astrology that we have. And this coming out from Sumeria, Babylonian, and Kemet, which is one at that particular time, was the most prominent reasons for astrology at that point. It didn't develop after a little bit to /Kemet, to transferring, as Brother Bob would say, which is ancient Greece, is also part of another extension of Africans, or people of color, let's put it that way. This here became into more centralized to where a person became into individual astrology, doing charts for a person instead of a state/king. Now, this part there is very important as far as relevance to, we'll get to a question I know it's coming up to, as the Bible and astrology, which we'll go to that too as well. So keep that in mind, mundane astrology with political astrology. The next one I want to go into is Sinistry. Sinistry is a very powerful chart that's this important because it deals with relationships. And I think everybody has to deal with Sinistry in other ways because they deal with relationship with their boss, or they're dealing with their wife, or they're dealing with their husband, or whatever the case may be, or children. Sinistry is very popular. This one is because when we go to a job relationship, to our boss and to relative co-workers, excuse me, they have a chart as well as you have a chart. And what happens is the interaction, just like you are doing emotionally or physically, the same interaction is happening with these two charts. And what astrology does is takes the two charts, actually do these two concepts. They combine them one over the other, or juxtapose, or they combine them together, which is called a composite. This is one of the most frequently asked questions when you astrologer is asked, how is this one right for me? This is where it comes out of Sinistry. This is another very sensitive part, but it's a very popular part of astrology that deals with any relationship between boss, state, or husband and wife, etc. The next point I want to get back into, or next branch of it, we'll deal with is electoral astrology. This was very popular during the time of Ronald Reagan, actually because of his astrologer, Joan Quigley, which actually was during the plotting of the time of him meeting the press or taking it. For example, his plane was known, even the press cited that his plane was known for takeoff. It would be a delay period of 20, sometimes 15 minutes to 30 minutes to whatever time frame it was. This was indicated because of the fact that his astrologer, Joan, had a designated time for that plane to lift off for its auspicious moment where it would be beneficial and safely to arrive to destination B from A.
So he basically charted most of his stuff on astrology?
Yes, he had most of his important decisions were astrologically based. And it's not uncommon because Ronald Reagan it was known for him even before he got the presidency as a governor, that he would be sworn in office before the traditional time, which was 12 noon. He would sometimes be 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. The reason why that was done is because he wanted the best time to be auspicious or beneficial for him or positive for his occupation, for his job. So, for example, a lot of people are not aware of this, but the time that you relocate or when you move into your apartment or to a house, that particular time when you first land, your personal item creates another chart, and it actually dictates of what's going to be the livelihood during that duration of that occupation, or what kind of climate you're going to have. Whether it's going to be a very shocking, or it could be a mild, or it could be very draining, or it could be never not rest. So it's all, again, has a factor of how things are doing. Again, going back to the two initial parts, timing and cycles. So the particular time of going into an apartment, or even purchasing a car, believe it or not, has a particular good moment to do it. And one of the examples is that when we go into work, we normally go to work, but we're not taking notice of certain times we leave the door. Every day it may not be exactly that 10 minutes after 8. It may be 15 minutes after 8, or maybe 20 minutes. Sometimes we run late. Each time, you know, a scenario, when you're running, sometimes you're running on a late cycle, you find that other things come in conjunction with that. Or you have a delay with the train, or you have not enough change, you forgot something, you have to come back. This is all in comparison to electoral astrology. Every moment has a being itself, a whole nother conscious world to deal with.
So that's called electoral?
Electoral. So it's the same thing of electing or choosing the time that you want to do that.
Is it good to have traditions, like a thing you do, like a tradition, like not a habit, but a ritual? Time and everything for things?
Good point.
All right, let me do a ritual we always do.
Okay.
This is Shabazz or Alvin and production. We're in the house with my man.
We gonna run this here today.
Brabam.
Yes.
Brabam.
Yes.
He's an astrologer, and the brother is a wealth of information, and he's agreed to come impart that information on us. And he's gonna deal with the myths, misconceptions in astrology, and he's basically gonna give us an introduction, and this is the first among many tapes. And he's gonna make appearances, and he's also available. But we're gonna get into that later too.
Yes, sir.
He provides a service for the community, and I'll tell you, he's right on the money. He's got the endorsement of endorsements. My man, a lot of people in the metaphysical community, so it's good. And it's good to get back to where we were at. You're talking about
different branches of astrology.
And he was up to the electoral.
Right.
Form of astrology, and I found that interesting. But we're gonna keep going because I got questions for him. And
go right ahead.
Time you'll hear the phone ring. That's different people calling.
First time, new concept.
Yeah,
Uranus the planet. Go right ahead.
It's not meaning that this is a live broadcast. This is a tape. So we're gonna be getting calls, and the brother's number will be posted in the beginning, so you'll get to see his information, so you can contact him. But he's here and he's doing his thing, and I'm gonna let him continue on.
Okay, great. Moving on from electoral astrology after that introductory ritual, I like that. No, I think it wasn't. I think it's more into play. I think that
Yeah, that's
commonly.
how we start, Tate, so.
And another thing is because astrology is ruled by a planet Uranus, which also rules the planet, or excuse me, the sign Aquarius. Uranus deals with unusual norms. Comes in there. So I think that's kind of the thing, is that goes to the territory of being an astrologer.
Right.
Okay? No problem. There's other branches we're going to get into as far as this locational astrology, which is important. If you move from, say, we're in New York, or move to Atlanta, Georgia, or Nebraska, or to California, each one of those spots have a different area of affecting your chart. Your actually, in 25 words, your whole chart doesn't change, but the outer rim of the chart, if you can imagine a circle, and inside the circle you have planets, which would be little symbols or dots inside the circle. The outer side rim, if you will, starts to move this direction, moving east or west, depending on which direction you're going. But the same planets stay in there, but imagine like a clock as the hands are going through the motions and going from clockwise. This is similar with just like when you have a moment electoral going to a certain time, maybe it's not auspicious for you. You are now going to another planet, location, that is not auspicious to you, or it could be very well positive to you. There's some places that I think Carlos Castaneda, in his book Tales of Power, talks about, I believe in the first 3 or 4 chapters, about power places or power zones, where actually all individuals have a certain place in the world that's more beneficial than others, believe it or not. Not necessarily where you're born at is maybe the best place for you, believe it or not. So some people do relocation, either for job or financial, but some people do it for as far as moving, enhancing itself astrologically for those who are in the community or those aware of into that too as well. I wanted to put that there. That's called locational astrology, or relocation, which / location. There's the next one I want to get into is financial astrology. Okay, financial astrology is not necessarily only about how money you're going to make or where to make the money is. That's true, that's part of it. But corporations, again, keep in mind that they are just like any entity that establish themselves. Anytime if you start a business or enterprise, that becomes an entity astrologically as well as a chart. Wow. Well, astrology and financial has that too. Every corporation from IBM has to go on when they open up, they have to have a charter or a business license, whatever it says. Well, that's because the origin, they have to establish themselves either on a free trade market, they have to be notified, and they have to be established. So they have that day. Usually it's 12 o'clock in the morning, morning, afternoon, That's when that happens. So that becomes the first entity of the business entity. That itself has a chart, which we are going to explain a little later, transits, which is planets is moving constantly.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because we started, really, myself, Black Guy, and Chris, we started this album and production thing on winter solstice.
Wow, that's a PowerPoint.
Yeah, and we've been just moving from there, man.
Okay, let me digress a little bit. Okay, let's go back. That particular time, any solstice that you have, like which will be a solstice or equinox, which will be the first one is the equinox, is in March 21st, 22nd approximately, or the second one is the solstice is in June to 21st, 23rd, and then your fall equinox will be in the point of September 22nd, 23rd, roughly, depending on the motion. And then the last week is the winter solstice, which is in December of 23rd, 22nd. Those are called, which I'll get into, these are called PowerPoints. They are called because the reason why the sun's at different locations, and it's actually we determine each season from that particular beginning of origin or beginning of that date transition, which is another part where I think I could slide into that one, but I have to go back to financial on this one, is meteorological astrology, which deals with weather concepts.
All right.
So, but let me go back too far. Let's go back and find it. Now, that particular time that you did, see, dealing with cardinal signs deal with the public. It's even with the mass public, and it's also, cardinals are known for initiating, I shouldn't say cardinal, but we'll say that point right now. We'll go into cardinals, fix it later on. Initiate energy, and it means always the first to start to do something. So actually, did you start on what we call the auspicious moment again? I love that word, but anyway. This here, that particular point is a new beginning, a new horizon. Your concepts will always be in the forefront. It also with dealing amongst the people in the public. It actually deals with, there's a certain branch of astrology called Uranian that deals with solstice point that actually is inherited with them. If you have certain factors on there, it will increase your power to work on certain things.
Right.
So if you were starting on a solstice point, even if some people, winter solstice, that's a period because actually it's a very unusual moment because it's the point where you have the shortest day of the year because the sun is shifting from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, so it's going down and increasing. But after that day is the sun is starting to build back up to the equinox of spring, which is in March. So after that day, so light starts to increase. So there's another concept with the moon, we use that is new moon and full moon. And that's called agricultural astrology. Now most people utilize that, most people know about it, especially from southern roots or horticulturists, that certain plants, when you're transferring plants, transplant, they always say do it on the new moon. Okay, which is auspicious because everybody can utilize that even in their life fundamentally. If you want to start a regimen of dieting, or if you want to start a ritual, it's like some people want to do for increasing money.
Quitting a habit.
It would be quitting a habit would be not on a new moon, but on a full moon. And I'll explain why is that. The reason why is for a ritual for like growth. The new moon from full moon actually increases. For new moons, actually, when you look at it, when you can't see it because it's totally dark. You just see a very slice when it starts to move, a thin like crescent. But a total new moon actually lasts for about 2 hours, actually. Then the moon is moving, but then you start to see that little thin crescent, which you identify as a new moon. After that, the moon increases in light. They call it a waxing moon. So, in principle of a cosmic ebb, that's the increasing cycle. So, if you want to initiate something to gain the positive, you want to do it on a new moon cycle because actually that starts to open up. Like a blossom or a flower that starts to open up and generate, so a germination of a plant seed growing and growing. If you, on the other hand, the counter opposite is on a full moon. If you want to quit something, you want to use it on a full moon because after the full moon, the light starts to decrease. And so if you want to quit a habit, this will give you the flow because this is the point where you want to do subtraction instead of addition. So if you do it on that one, you have a better way of doing it that way. You have the cosmic flow going with you in that way.
Wow, I had no idea, man.
Oh, that's what it's all about. I mean, but you know the thing about it? That's one of the things, again, like Misconceptions, they fake is out there, and I know we got some questions, so I don't want to tip that on there before then. So this is the way, basic understanding, there's no hocus pocus, abracadabra.
Abracadabra.
On that there. So again, like I say, we're dealing on a very light matter. We don't want to get into too much specifics, but we want to keep it this way, and we're going to go with it. Now, the financial, again, is corporations have what you call, like everybody experiences, particularly now, is the downside word, or what's the other one? Merging, which was popular in the 80s. These charts will show corporations when this is most likely to happen, or when a trimlining or slimlining, so to speak, is shown through financial charts. Then there's a cycle of what we call the financial cycle, which is the planet Saturn and Jupiter when they conjunct, which takes approximately about every 20 years. For examples, a benchmark every 20 years on a zero number, meaning like for our last one was 2000, and before that one it was 1980, going back 20 years back in sequence, and then from 1980 to 1960. What was significant about that, I believe Lloyd Strathorn brought this one out in his book, Numbers for You, the Tecumseh curse, which was supposed to brought it about an Indian to put it on, I think if I'm not mistaken, not McOff, I'm sorry. But anyway, I won't get into it because I don't know for sure, memory fails me there. But evidently, from that period on, every 20 years, a president has been elected on a 0 year, has either died in office or got killed in office. The only one that did able to change that to a degree, which one to use astrology by far too, Ronald Reagan. But he did get shot. He had attempted shot, so he was wounded by this. So he was able to sidestep it, but he was able to, and that was to come out gracefully in that sense. But he also actually had the background astrology to utilize it, to know what he's doing with it. The next one was, unfortunately, is Ben Bush. And Bush is the first one. If he successfully leaves his office, he will be the first one that beats the cycle without getting injured or crippled or died.
But you know what? You got a lot of escape hatches in that one because he wasn't elected.
That's true too. You're right. You got a point there. And you know what? We have to do a series, not a series, but another tape on this because we got certain phenomena I like to do too, like on celebrities and so forth.
Right.
And
We need that.
And we'll do this again on that realm, and we can go back and forth, and we'll get our live crew there. We'll go.
Yeah, we do that.
But you're right. He was elected. You're right. He was the first one that's not elected in office. You're absolutely right. And this election was a very unusual one because they have a phenomenon, which I would say too, with the astrology we call a retrograde Mercury. What that means is that the planet actually, if you're looking in the sky through a telescope, by way of telescope or if you binocular, a planet Mercury, wherever you notify it, will be looking like instead of moving this way, it'll be moving this way as retrograde. This is very good for a phenomenon knowing that we call it not appropriate time to sign contracts, communication breakdowns. For example, that people known to get wrong numbers. Mail will get misdelivered to another place or maybe get held up, it won't be arrived at the point in time. It also means anything that deals with communication is at that point kind of chaotic. First thing I remember looking at the elections at that time in the evening was that at one point they announced that Gore had won Florida. I think when I got back up around, at 12:30, around there approximately, they had said Bush had won. This is one of the examples of media and communication with Mercury retrograde. It was flip-flopping, and it was the only, election we had this time that lasted till they found the elected official until the next month in December or so forth, which was elected through it. So that's another phenomenon, though, that's going on there. But now moving back on there, unless you have any quick questions before I go in.
Not yet. I'm waiting for the phone to ring. When they start calling, I'm going to get you. I'm gonna let them get to you.
No problem. We have some already called in answers and questions rather, so we can do that too.
Yeah.
And the next thing I would like to go into is the location Sinistry. It's called Astrotherapy. This is one I know personally on hand because I actually met a clinical psychologist that actually is an astrologer and is a licensed psychologist. This part of astrology is termed humanistic one, but it's psychologically based oriented, meaning in other words, they do work with people, some people on personal therapy avenues, but they also take it from a psychological viewpoint of how a person reacts to certain ways in life. In other words, the planets, as we'll go into, I think that'll be my next thing I go so we can generate more. The planets actually symbolize a certain psychological nature. I think we was talking a little earlier about Mars and Aries, or how that the planet Mars makes a person more aggressive, or activity, which is now becoming another phenomenon, calling the hyperactive or attention deficit. That's one of the things, but it's kind of like misconstrued because I think that's too another. So we're going to do in the next one. We can start doing about the children, indigo children too as well. Okay. So we can do some of that too as well. And lastly, there are people that do therapy through person's subconscious, and it uses astrologically symbolizing the moon, which mainly is one of the planets that symbolizes the subconscious. So actually, if you're studying astrology for a certain period of time, you can actually look at the person's mother and some of their past. Not being that you can actually take a microscope and look at it through a real tape and running it back, but you can see from the patterns in the birth chart if this person had a very harmonious childhood or inharmonious childhood. And being the fact that the moon rules the subconscious and the mother. And the reason why I explain why is that because in the moon, it deals with, actually there's not more than two, but there's two classic ones, masculine, feminine planets. And both of them they have either classified as masculine, feminine planets, Then there's some, there's only about one I know is a neutral. Depending, there's about two actually, depending which moon is used. The moon is actually classic for a feminine planet. Symbolizes the mother, the subconscious in the past. So actually, looking at a person's chart after a certain period of time, you actually see the connection with the mother and the person through their chart. How is it displayed in the chart? How it interacts with the chart shows the interaction between the child and the mother. And again, one of the reasons they use that because of the first introduction to the feminine aspect of a child is through the mother because of the connection of birth, for carrying for 9 months. So everything, and that's been documented now, everything from the mother experienced on the outer stimuli, from even falling or hurting or either pain